The fallout from the Acolyte just keeps continuing, and it makes you wonder what's going to happen next. It's been exactly 20 days since the Civil War in the Star Wars fandom really kicked off. And there has been so much going on. Death threats, people going to police stations, videos being made, articles being written, the amount of tweets back and forth. This is kind of getting out of control, and it's been really hard to follow. So on this video, I'm going to do a timeline breakdown of exactly what's been happening from the moment that Mollie Damon put out her tweet on September 4th all the way up to today. Make sure you stick all the way through to the end of the video, where at the end I'm going to give some of my thoughts, especially around this idea of how much responsibility falls on the creator for what their followers end up doing. You're going to want to hear that conversation. For right now, hit that like button and let's jump in. September 4th, Mollie Damon and a bunch of other creators, and if you haven't heard of this by now, well, where have you been? Because they put out this tweet with a bit of a manifesto trying to deplatform and demonetize a number of creators in the space, and it got picked up by Star Wars Theory. Because on the next day, Star Wars Theory kind of just posted this monocle. He's watching the situation, and we know from what's going to happen over the next few days from this point that there's a lot that's going to go on. So here it is. September 5th, that came out. September 8th, Star Wars Theory makes a video about Star Wars Explained and this effort to demonetize, and he starts showing receipts of what's been going on, some of his communication with Alex from Star Wars Theory, and his take on how this has all been about jealousy and desiring for money and wanting more views, and that's been Star Wars Theory's perspective, and how all of this kind of stems from differing understandings of the Acolyte. Then, later on that same day, we see a connection. The Stupendous Wave puts out a tweet. Now, Stupendous Wave is one of the other largest creators in the YouTube space who's been around forever making YouTube videos, particularly around Star Wars lore. And he said this: "I appreciate this video, lots of context, just wanted to add a bit of my very small part. I've had little to no personal interaction with most Star Wars channels over my career by design. I've tried to respond to people, but sometimes emails and comments get buried. In 2016, I turned 18 and my life changed. I moved and devoted more of my time to YouTube, but I didn't feel ready to jump into a community I knew little about. There was a period of time where I spent a lot of time online in my early YouTube career, and it felt like it was getting unhealthy for me, so I decided to keep my channel more personal. Watching this, I'm glad that I did. I think trying to deplatform creators is dangerous and wrong. I'm glad Star Wars Theory was candid with this." Now, if you don't know, this spurred on more conversation between Star Wars Theory and Stupendous Wave, to the point where they're starting to now record a podcast, and Thursday night they're going to be doing a podcast where all of the proceeds go to St. Jude's Hospital. I think it's a pretty great thing, even if you disagree, no matter where you stand on this topic. This was a good connection. Then it continues. Star Wars Theory connected and mended the bridges with Eckhart's Ladder, another big creator in the space. Not going to read all the message here. You can pause and read, but you can see how some of what's been happening as a result of all of this drama has been some of these creators kind of making things right and not standing with Mollie and Alex, while a bunch have been giving their support to deplatforming and getting rid of Star Wars Theory and a bunch of other YouTubers who feel the same about the Acolyte in particular. You can see that there's not everyone that feels that way. Also on September 8th, Star Wars Theory put out this tweet saying that there's been many people who have been reaching out to him in his DMs, kind of sharing their weird Alex Star Wars Explained stories. Again, that's just part of the timeline, whether it's true or not. Then on September 9th, Paul Tassi jumps into the fray, and he writes this article: "The Acolyte has caused Star Wars fandom to plunge into civil war." We're going to talk more about this article because it's going to come up a little bit later, but just know Paul is part of this whole thing as we move forward in the timeline when things start to get really crazy. Then on September 11th, yours truly decided, I feel like I need to say some stuff here, even if no one's gonna watch it. Well, a bunch of you decided to watch it. Thanks for watching. And if that's why you're here, I appreciate you being here. I just gave some of my thoughts. I'm not gonna talk about it here. If you wanna watch the video, you can go watch it. But then after that, we had more responses, because then Star Wars Theory makes a response video to what YouTube came out and said, and basically said they reviewed the videos in question, and they did not break the terms of service the way that people were claiming that they did. There's been debate over this. There's been conversation back and forth. A lot of people feeling like it's been bots that said this and it wasn't really analyzed and YouTube's just protecting creators. But that's the video he makes. But then it gets even more interesting, because as folks started to fail in their campaign against these channels, they seemingly went about other avenues trying to demonetize. Okay, if YouTube isn't going to listen to what we say, we're going to go and try to claim music that is on these channels. And that's what started to happen. And here you can see a tweet on September 12th from Star Wars Theory, as people are claiming something that's been in the making for a long time. You can see that it was claimed here on September 12th, but it was all copyright-free music that had been used because it had been sitting there for so long back. I don't even know how many years. You can comment down below. I'm not looking it up right now. We're going to keep moving. And then on September 13th, Paul Tassi decides to write an article that seemingly wasn't necessarily about any of this stuff, except it ended up being, and it kind of got out of hand. Because he wrote this, that the Clone Wars should do Star Wars in live action with Ewan and Hayden. You might be wondering, what does this have to do with any of it? We'll get there. You'll see. And then Star Wars Theory makes a video kind of going back through the whole, hey, this stuff is being demonetized. It's kind of ridiculous. It wasn't even monetized to begin with, but now it's being claimed. I wasn't making money off of those videos. And it's just kind of all ridiculous. And then on September 17th, Star Wars Theory makes a video reacting to the Forbes article that Paul Tassi wrote. Now here's where things probably should have just ended. All of the drama that continues from this point on could have just been over. Yes, Star Wars Theory has had some people coming after him multiple different times from different avenues, and he's been kind of watching it all, taking it all in, and he's getting fed up and frustrated. So he makes a video reacting to the Paul Tassi article, where he does say some things against Paul, frustrated that Paul has used his name and kind of come after him in tweets and replies and other ways in articles, kind of showing how this isn't the first time that Star Wars Theory has kind of had a run-in with Paul. And even in this article, Star Wars Theory isn't really mentioned, but it comes back to an idea that Star Wars Theory is claiming he kind of talked about first, and in many ways, a lot of folks on the internet kind of shot down and didn't like, but then Paul Tassi runs this article. I'm going to say this at the onset. Star Wars Theory doesn't own ideas. He didn't copyright the idea that, hey, this should be a live action series. Tons of people were talking about that around the time of Ahsoka. When they saw these scenes, it wasn't anything ridiculous. The difference is Star Wars Theory has a relationship with Hayden Christensen. He can have some of those conversations, but that doesn't mean that other people can't write about it. But what happens from here on is pretty ridiculous. Here's a tweet example of how Star Wars Theory has said he thinks Anakin Skywalker is the coolest character in all of Star Wars, so on and so forth. But notice when that was tweeted out. September 15th, 2023. A year ago, almost to the day of the article by Paul Tassi. Now, does that mean specifically that Paul stole the idea? No, because Star Wars Theory doesn't own the idea. But anyway, in that video, Star Wars Theory, who's been under attack from so many different angles, kind of starting to fire back, and he fired back at Paul Tassi. Well, here comes Paul out on Twitter, because everyone's a keyboard warrior, and he says, you use incognito mode for porn, I use it to check out channels that make videos about me that I do not want in my algorithm. Well, Star Wars Theory responds, "Don't cry, Paul. The countless unprovoked jabs and full-on articles you've written about me are why we're here. Don't come after me, then cry about it when I respond. Incognito or not, I'm rent-free in your head, you weak man." And this is just kind of, I'm just going to be honest, it is kind of getting ridiculous. I understand why Star Wars Theory is frustrated, and he has some justification to be that in a 2-week span, all of these things are kind of happening, things are popping up, and there's been a mountain of criticism that's been hurled at him over the years, and he's kind of just fed up with it all and starting to punch back. I get that. I also think this is where it starts to just go kind of a little too far, but is that all going to be on Star Wars Theory? I don't think so, even though some of the people on the internet think it is. Paul Tassi responds, "You just made a monetized video with 300,000 views reading my article out loud with no link. How is this not me making you money?" Now, I do think you should probably include links, but also, why would he want to link to someone who he doesn't want to support? Everyone could look it up. Clearly, we know it's Forbes, Paul Tassi, the name of the article. Whether or not there's a link there, I don't think that that's a problem. He didn't pass it off as his own writing. We clearly know who's writing the article. This is a silly tweet, right? But it just keeps going because all of a sudden, now Paul Tassi is starting to get threats from people. Seemingly, he blames Star Wars Theory for these texts. He says, "Hey, real Star Wars Theory, what kind of community have you cultivated here exactly?" I'm not going to read these out loud because I don't condone this type of language. We shouldn't be talking to people like this. And it's basically here that just gets outlined someone going after Paul Tassi here in these screenshots. And you can even see he doesn't black out the number. It's all right here. He says, "I don't have any idea who this person got my number, how this person got my number. First time this has happened." He's bitching about the Acolyte, and he mentions the Acolyte in the tweets. And so here's where Paul, sharing what someone after coming after him regarding what Star Wars Theory has said. However, to blame Star Wars Theory is wrong. To put all of the blame on him and say, "Hey, you shouldn't have said these things," right? Your fault. It's you who I blame. And Paul even continues, says, "I was just in a police station filing a report about a guy texting me threats, citing your last video directly. I would not continue down this road." So now he's blaming Star Wars Theory for having an opinion about his article and someone who took that opinion and went too far. Well, then I hopped in on the fray, and you can follow me on Twitter if you want to see what I'm tweeting. But here's what I tweeted, because Star Wars Theory tweeted out, "Harassment of family is not okay. Harassment of anyone is not okay. Like the harassment these people have sent my way, everyone." And he continues through, and I quote tweeted that, saying, "For all those trying to blame Theory for the actions of moron followers," saying that he hasn't said enough. Now, just because the way that he went about denouncing this harassment wasn't the way that you would have done it, doesn't mean he didn't denounce it. If you've watched some of Star Wars Theory's videos, you don't have to watch many of them to see and hear that he says often and repeats often that we should not be showing hate towards anyone, that we should not be doing that. He shares about his own life, how he was bullied for even just liking Star Wars. That doesn't mean he's absolved of everything, but it also should take into account that you can't blame him for what one random person does. And we're going to talk about then, where does this accountability fall for creators? We'll get there in a little bit. And so the receipts keep getting shown, because now all of a sudden someone claims on Twitter to be the one who sent this message. And he gives the reason how he did it by getting a Gmail. He goes, "So this was you?" "Sure was." Comes to Louis B, Life with Louis with Lou 845, and you can start to see some of the content he's reposted, all political stuff, and we can even see he will post his own screenshot of this. Though this screenshot is a trip. This screenshot is a trip. You have a video of Benny Johnson, the political commentator, the kind of very conservative political commentator. This is happening at 2:44 a.m. You've got 7 unread messages. He's claiming this and showing this. Whether this is true or real, or it's hard to know, right? Hard to know whatever is real on the internet, but it's just all ridiculous. And it continues. Then, a few days ago, and this was on September 21st, now we have another video of Star Wars Theory posting about a Forbes article. This is the Forbes article that was written back on September 9th. You can see the title is the same there. The Acolyte has caused Star Wars fandom to plunge into civil war. And this is where Paul Tassi is basically siding with all of those who brought forward that manifesto, siding with Mollie Damon, siding with and saying that this side of the toxic fandom needs to go. So now all of a sudden, you can see how this has been Paul poking the bear at Star Wars Theory and then getting upset that Star Wars Theory read one of his articles online and criticized him for his perspective of going after Star Wars Theory. Regardless of where you fall on this, Paul Tassi wants to play like he's not done or said anything, but he agreed with those who put out that manifesto. So if you're going to agree with the people that are trying to deplatform, demonetize based on opinions, then you can't complain when people push back and kind of go after what you've said in the article and the way that you have approached talking about these things. You can't get upset about that. And so that's what brings us up all the way to current day. That was yesterday or 2 days ago that video was posted. And now we're going to see, where does this go from here? And where does the responsibility of creators fall when talking about and criticizing projects in entertainment, criticizing actors and actresses, criticizing directors and all of that? Where does our responsibility fall? Well, I think there is a truth in this that happens. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about group polarization theory for a moment, because I think this helps understand why some people are going to claim that there is a problem here, that we should blame creators, but yet at the same time, I think something more is happening here. Group polarization theory is this. Group polarization refers to the tendency of groups to adopt a more extreme attitudes than the initial attitudes of their members, meaning followers go further, that when you get into a specific group that only thinks a certain way, where you're not having conversation about differences and having different opinions, your theory or your group will then become more extreme than the initial beginning point of where you started. And this is what is happening in America, in our world today, where we used to have a lot more people in the middle, and now you're seeing this group polarization. You go to your own faction in your own group, and it's being these like extremes now that seemingly amass all of these people, and these followers end up going way further than the person even maybe bringing the idea. So how does this work? Let me give an example. Say you have a video about how Luke Skywalker is a horrible hero in The Last Jedi. Kind of like a video that I have dropping here at the end of the week. So make sure you subscribe, turn on the bell for notifications for that video. But in that video, I give some evidences of why I think Luke was written horribly in that movie. And I get frustrated and maybe even annoyed at how Luke is portrayed. And now there is a group that might come around that who believe similarly. And then all of a sudden, in that time together, the longer that group stays together, the further the audience and the group might go, but not based on necessarily where we started. So then they might get more frustrated in the comments and get angrier and angrier and end up doing something extreme or believing something extreme that wasn't part of the original content or the original thought behind it. Is that then the content creator's fault solely? No. I don't think you could put all the blame on the content creator, but content creators do have a responsibility to make sure they are not endorsing people going and doing the behavior like we see here throughout this whole experiment, this whole kind of Twitter back and forth thing. And that has been happening. How many people, I've already said it, Star Wars Theory says it multiple times, don't go do mean things. And even in the original coverage of all of this with Geeks and Gamers, he doesn't go after Kelly Marie Tran, he goes after Rose Tico, the character, and he even makes it clear that those two things are separate and different, that no one should go hate Daisy Ridley for Rey and show that actress hatred. But unfortunately, that's what happens. I might think that Hayden Christensen did a poor job of acting in the prequels. Fine, but I should not do anything against Hayden Christensen. I shouldn't be mean and hateful towards him when it might have been the writing or the directing, not so much on the actor. Those are the types of things we're talking about, but yet what we see in our culture today is people going to the extremes, getting into these group thinks, and they don't ever break out of it because there's no nuance, there's no pushback, there's no opportunity to have a counterpoint, because as soon as you bring a counterpoint, what are you called? Racist. You're called racist. You're an istinophobe if you bring a counterpoint to the groupthink. Do you see how this polarization can happen on the extremes? It's not just conservative, it's not just liberal, it's both. It's any group that happens, and that is the problem that's happening in the Star Wars fandom right now, where we're not engaging well in many cases with the thoughts of the other. Instead, we're name calling and going back and forth instead of hearing actual arguments. This is where I think social media becomes part of the problem. Like, back to this image right here, the example. It says this. Again, here's the definition. The phenomenon that after group discussion, the average judgment of group members tends to be more extreme in the direction that was initially favored by the group. So say you have a live stream about the Acolyte, and then after all of that, the group becomes more extreme than was initially favored or desired by that group even. Here's the example. Social media exasperates group polarization by bringing like-minded users from all over the world together. Landelli et al. 2021 argue that social media enables homophily, the tendency to engage with similar people, creating groups where certain views are dominant. So we must be cautious of this, right? I think we all should be cautious of this, and we all shouldn't just listen to people we only ever agree with. Goodness knows you're going to disagree with me about Star Wars, and that's fine. And I'm going to disagree with you, and that's fine. And we can actually have conversation. But the more that this continues, the more that we cannot actually have true, honest conversation with people we disagree with is what's pulling apart the Star Wars fandom, and is what's making this more and more and more and more extreme. It brings up the question, what's going to happen next? I don't know, but we're going to find out together. Guys, thanks for being here. That's the video. I got nothing more for you. Now it's your turn. Take to the comments below. What did I miss? Where am I wrong? Or do you agree with this perspective that it's this group polarization that's really actually becoming a problem? And as creators, we should probably have a little bit more clarity to continue to say, you shouldn't be harming anyone. You shouldn't be going after anyone. And if you do, you're not welcome here in this community. That would be my stance. I don't know. Do you think that's a fair stance to take? Thanks for being here. I'll see you down in the comments. Remember, the Force is with you always.